If you've done CBT for social anxiety and it didn't work, I need you to hear this. You weren't doing it wrong. You weren't failing to commit, and you weren't the problem. The model CBT is built on is missing something, and almost nobody in the clinical world talks about what that something actually is. I spent years inside the CBT, challenging cognitive distortions, and my anxiety got worse. For a long time, I thought that meant something was wrong with me, but it wasn't. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what CBT is missing and why understanding that gap changes everything. My name is Blake, and I am the creator of SocialAnxietyHaven.com, a platform built around one question that I spent years trying to answer. Why does social anxiety persist, even when you do everything right? 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder, and it was severe. I couldn't go to class, I couldn't go out with friends. Even basic social situations produced a level of pain that I did not know was possible. It was constant, and it felt inescapable. When I started CBT, I went in with everything. Full commitment. I desperately wanted to get better. But something strange happened. The more I engaged with the process, the worse I felt. Every time I was told to challenge a negative thought, it felt like I was being asked to fight who I was. Like the thoughts were mine, and attacking them meant attacking me. And then there was something deeper that nobody really named at the time. I had no idea what I was actually challenging. My therapist didn't really know either. We were both just working with symptoms and reducing those symptoms, but neither of us was touching the thing underneath the bed. Eventually, I stopped doing CBT the way it was prescribed, and I started studying the mechanisms, the actual clinical research on how social anxiety is maintained. If you've tried CBT and it hasn't worked the way that you wanted it to, what I'm about to explain is not just another technique. It's a framework for understanding why nothing has worked, and that understanding is the first thing that actually mattered for me. So to understand what CBT is missing, you first have to understand what it's actually doing, because it isn't doing nothing. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, is built on a well-established premise that our emotional experiences are heavily shaped by our thoughts. If you have social anxiety, you're generating a high volume of negative, threat-focused thoughts about social situations. You believe people are judging you. You believe you are going to say something embarrassing. You believe your anxiety is visible to others, and that others can see how uncomfortable you actually are. CBT's intervention is to target those thoughts directly. You identify the cognitive distortions and you challenge them with evidence. You practice exposure so that anxiety responses gradually reduce. And for some people with some presentations of anxiety, this works. But for a specific subset of people, particularly those with deeply entrenched social anxiety, people for whom the anxiety feels identity level rather than situational, CBT produces limited relief at best. And at worst, it produces what it produced in me, the feeling that you are just challenging yourself and that you can't be fixed later on in life. The reason for that is not a failure of effort. It's a structural problem with what CBT is actually targeting. And here's the thing about social anxiety that CBT doesn't fully account for. In severe cases, the anxiety isn't being generated primarily by your thoughts. It's being generated by something deeper, a shame-based identity, a core set of beliefs about who you are in relation to other people. And that identity has a protection system. There's a psychological phenomenon called self-verification, first described by social psychologist William Swan, which describes the way people actively seek out information that confirms their existing self-perception, even when that self-concept is negative. In other words, the identity doesn't just sit there passively. It filters incoming information to protect itself. For example, let's say you're in CBT and your therapist tells you, "That was a great contribution in the meeting today." And on the surface, you hear it, but something underneath immediately processes it differently. She was just being nice. That's an exception. It doesn't count. Anyone could have said that. It doesn't mean anything about me. This voice isn't just an inner critic. It also isn't a thinking error you can just identify and correct. This is exactly the self-verification mechanism that Swan described, doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting the coherence of your identity by neutralizing evidence that contradicts it. You might be wondering why your brain does this. It does this to preserve certainty. A mind that is certain of who its host is, even if it's negative, is safer than a mind that doesn't know who its host is. This is exactly why thought challenges don't work at the identity level. You can say the right things to yourself all day. You can generate every balanced counter-thought CBT prescribes. But if those counter-thoughts are being processed by an identity that was built around the belief that you are fundamentally unacceptable to other people, they don't reach the structure. They get neutralized before they even arrive. For example, imagine you're trying to convince someone who genuinely believes they're ugly that they're beautiful. You can say it 100 times to them. You can write it down. You can have other people even say it to them. But the mirror they're looking into doesn't change. CBT gives you better things to say to the person in the mirror, but it doesn't change the mirror itself. That's the gap. And that gap is why a significant number of people who are intelligent, committed, motivated, go through CBT and come out the other side still stuck. But there's a second problem that I think is even more fundamental, and it's one that almost nobody talks about. CBT doesn't fully know what it's targeting, and in many cases, neither does the therapist delivering it. Challenge your negative thoughts sounds like an instruction, but it's actually a description of a surface behavior with no model underneath it. What thoughts? Where are they coming from? What is generating them? What maintains them between sessions? The answer CBT implicitly gives is cognitive distortions, inaccurate thinking patterns, and that framing puts the problem at the level of thought, which means the intervention also operates at the level of thought. But in severe chronic social anxiety, the negativity isn't primarily coming from thoughts. Thoughts are downstream. The actual architecture is far below thought. It's operating at the level of identity, which interacts with memory, physiological threat, and a belief system about social reality that was built over years, often starting in childhood. That system isn't accessible through conscious thought challenges. It's not a thinking problem. It's a structural one. Here's what that means for you as a patient. When CBT isn't working, the model will attribute that failure to your effort or your willingness to engage. It will suggest you need more exposure, more homework, more practice. But what it won't tell you is that it might be operating at the wrong level of the system entirely. That's what happened to me. And based on what I've studied since, it isn't rare. It's a predictable outcome for a specific profile of a person, someone whose anxiety is identity level, not just situational. So here's where I want to leave you. You are not broken. You never were broken. And the ceiling on your recovery was never about managing symptoms. There's a layer underneath your recovery that has been hidden. There is a framework inside of social anxiety, a mechanism that CBT does not account for. What I've built, what this channel is built around, is a model that addresses this mechanism directly. Not by challenging thoughts or incremental exposure, but by understanding the structure that's maintaining the anxiety and building the conditions under which the structure actually updates. I'm not going to lay out the full model in this video, but what I've covered today is the gap, the thing that's actually missing, the deeper explanation of why that gap exists, and what a model that addresses it would need to do lives in the newsletter for my channel. If what I've covered today resonated with you, if this is the first explanation of your experience that has actually made sense to you, that's where to go next. It's not more of the same content. It's the layer underneath, and the link for the newsletter is in the description below. And if you found this video valuable, please consider subscribing, because the mechanism I just started explaining goes much deeper than this. The next video is going to go further into it, and the one after that goes further still. I'll see you guys there.